Let's go to Ukraine and check in with Joseph Lindsley. Joe, I don't know if you have had a chance to see this documentary that Sean Penn did, Superpower. I've been hearing about it. It's on Paramount Plus here now. It sounds like a fascinating documentary. Did you get a chance to see it?
No, Bob, I haven't. And hello from Kyiv. I do want to see it. And I've been talking about Sean Penn recently. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but early, I think it was the first day of Russia's full-scale invasion. I had custody of his bulletproof vest because he was in Kyiv already for a film project, and unrelated, I think. And he didn't know this was going to happen, and he had to escape those first few days. And through a chain of connection, I knew people who knew him, and so we had some of his material we took care of until he was able to return to Ukraine. And, Sean Penn is interesting because, I think among the American right, many people don't trust him. For many years, he would travel to Venezuela and, sort of became friends with Chavez, the former dictator of Venezuela, the late dictator, and was sort of involved in these causes of tyrants. And so people didn't trust him. But then I think what gets missed is when he came to Ukraine, there's something changed in him. And I've seen it in his interviews about Ukraine. He gave his Oscar to President Zelensky. He never gave an Oscar to Chavez or other dictators that he used to hang out with. And I think here we have a case of someone who was looking for a cause, looking for meaning in the world of Hollywood, and maybe was certainly misguided going to these tyrannical regimes. But here in Ukraine, he found it, and that's why he's been so devoted to this, giving his Oscar and making this film. But so I haven't seen it, but I do hope to see it.
Me too. Headline this morning, and it reads, Kyiv said to be considering dismissal of army commanders. You're in Kyiv. What's that all about?
Well, we're in a strange, I think there's very curious headlines recently. I think the biggest news from Ukraine right now is still, right now we're under a nationwide air alarm due to Russian jets that are capable of carrying hypersonic missiles are flying over Russia. But this happens about once or twice a week, and these are training flights. And we still are in this situation where it's been, I think, 55 or 56 days now since a major coordinated Russian attack throughout Ukraine. And, I've been a lone voice saying this and emphasizing this. This is a window of opportunity for the West to supply Ukraine. It's unusual, that Russia has not had these major attacks. Everyone had been expecting infrastructure attacks, and they haven't happened. And then this is, the Russians have had sort of terroristic attacks on cities near the front line. There was a strange missile attack on Kyiv on Saturday, but very minor compared to what we've seen, especially what we saw through last winter. And actually today, Ukrainian Navy sort of confirmed this idea that I've been saying, that the Ukrainians are now willing to say confidently that there's a reason. The spokesperson for the naval forces of Ukraine, it's a very small navy, but he said that's why you were seeing such a big pause in the use of missiles, because now the enemy, the Russians, are faced with the problem of lack of logistics because of Ukraine's attacks upon the Black Sea Fleet, which really began very decisively September 22nd with that hit upon the Black Sea Fleet headquarters and many of the ships. We cannot underestimate exactly how big that damage is. And former top U.S. General Ben Hodges, who's been one of the few rare and clear voices saying that Ukrainian victory is possible, he seized upon this statement. He's been realizing this too, that the Russians are in a weakened position logistically. And he today, in response to what the Ukrainian Navy said, saying indeed that this is the reason for these 55 days of relative calm throughout the country. He said, this is proof, according to Ben Hodges, that those Storm Shadow missiles from the United Kingdom, these long-range missiles are incredibly effective. And then the general said, the American general, retired general said, imagine if the U.S. and Germany would provide ATACMS, those long-range ballistic missiles, and the German Taurus ballistic missiles. Just imagine, he said, Crimea would be untenable for the Russian forces. And so the voices here are saying, Ukrainians are showing that this victory is really, really possible, but still we don't, even in these windows of opportunity, we don't see the West waking up to that reality. And instead we see these negative headlines, such as the headline you mentioned, looking at internal strife. Maybe 10 days ago, there was a story in the Washington Post by a very brave and respectable journalist, Siobhan O'Grady. But and she spends a lot of time here. She's been under fire. She says morale is low among civilians. It's just not true. I mean, as I've reported when I'm in Kharkiv, life is coming back in extraordinary ways. And in the Hill newspaper out of Washington, a Russian-born journalist, Yulia Latinina, she has written articles criticizing Putin in the past 21 months, including in the New York Times. And now there was the story, I think it was yesterday or a couple of days ago, headline, Ukraine is waking up to the reality. And basically she's saying Ukraine is losing. And so we got to bear in mind that the Kremlin propaganda is very shrewd. And it's very possible that people who claim to support Ukraine were waiting for moments like this, when Russia is at its weakest, to start polluting the media with these negative ideas that have no bearing in reality. So Yulia in the Hill is writing that, in Ukraine, she's the quote, in Ukraine itself, things are not so bright. The initial incredible enthusiasm has waned. This is not accurate and true of what's happening. And then there's this guy, Konstantin Kisin. He's a British sort of public commentator. He was born in Russia, and he was defending Ukraine and criticizing Putin in British public debates and media for the past 20 or so months. He's ingratiated himself with people like Glenn Beck and Megyn Kelly. He goes on their shows. And now a couple of days ago, he said, I love Ukraine, but with a heavy heart, I have to say it's time for the war to end, which means it's time for Ukraine to negotiate. And this is absolutely ridiculous, as General Ben Hodges would acknowledge, as everyone here acknowledges, because Ukraine has got the Russian Navy on the run, and Russian logistics to attack Ukraine the way they did a year ago are broken.
You're so right about all of this, Joseph. Wall Street Journal reporter in Kyiv writing today that fatigue will make this winter more difficult than the last one, that there is a darkening mood in Ukraine. And you're so right about how important it is to get the truth out, especially with the fresh aid package from the United States tied up in Congress now. And we're seeing how important, if you want to call it the propaganda war, is. Look at what's happening with Israel and Hamas. And I believe Hamas is winning that information war right now, don't you?
Yeah, and it's the same. I mean, this is what Russia tried to do in the beginning. And fortunately, they were not able to get away with it. But to accuse Ukrainians of doing that which the Russians have been doing. And that's exactly what Hamas is doing with Israel. And so, we have to go back and look at, for one, Russia and Hamas are allies. Russia has refused to condemn Hamas. And we're not for Hamas. Hamas is oppressing its own people. Same with the Kremlin oppressing its people. And if we, when we think about this propaganda, and I was thinking about with the news that came out of the UK yesterday with the new foreign secretary, David Cameron. And it's one of my crazy stories, maybe, but it reminded me of the last time I was in London. And this was an insight into how we can't at face value trust the media, trust intelligence services. We really have to, in conversation, think for ourselves. And I was in London to speak in the British Parliament against Rupert Murdoch. It's a whole other story. I arrived very jet lagged, and a friend of mine from the U.S. had connected me to some friends in the British Foreign Office, the office that now David Cameron is taking over. And my friend in the U.S., I knew he was pretty well connected to like sort of our James Bond, sort of Langley, Virginia stuff. But I was jet lagged and didn't think much of it. And a few hours after landing, I go to the British Foreign Office. These nice people are giving me a tour. Then they take me onto Downing Street, and I realize, maybe they're, pretty high level. And then afterward, like all Brits in London, you go to the pub at about 4:55, and we're at one of the pubs next to Parliament, and it's very crowded, and with people that work in the British government on Whitehall and in the Parliament. And we were running out of beers, so I go to get another round for these people that work in the British Foreign Office, and I go to the bar, and I'm gone for about 10 minutes. And one of the guys from the Foreign Office finds me at the bar, and I'm surrounded by people. Someone's giving me a shot to drink, and the guy from the Foreign Office says, Joe, we were worried about you. And everyone around me says, oh, how do you know Joe? And they all seem to know me. And the guy from the Foreign Office said, Joe, did you know these people before? I said, no, they just started talking to me and they're giving me shots. And the guy from the Foreign Office looks at me and says, now I know why you're one of us. And it turns out, Bob, I don't know if I should tell this, that they were MI6 guys.
Wow.
And I'm not. I've never worked for any of that stuff. And they simply thought, because of the nice introduction from my friend in the States, and because somehow I could talk to people and they would tell me their stories, that I must have been one of them in the spy agencies. And that moment, like with many other revelations in my life in those situations, show me that even the experts don't usually always know what's going on. Even Rishi Sunak bringing in David Cameron, it's probably because he's scared. He's scared about what's happening in Ukraine, scared about what's happening in Gaza. And even the people at the high levels with highest levels of security clearance and information, they often don't know the reality and what's going on. And the ease of which they could just assume that I was one of them was an eye-opening experience. So we should always be skeptical and always think for ourselves in conversation with each other.
Wow, what a great story. Well, we have another section of what I hope will be a book from the world's most interesting man, Joseph Lindsley, the UK chapter. Can't wait for that. You get to work on that, Joseph.
If I survive after telling these stories. Yeah.
You will. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.
Until tomorrow, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important, that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав?
Well, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Ебать.